The two of you have given DNA evidence to the police.
Absolutely. Blood, hair, DNA, everything. We've given them everything they've asked for.
You have not classified any individual as a suspect.
Publicly correct. Internally, John and Patsy are considered suspects.
Both of them
Yes.
are considered to have probably been involved in the death of their daughter.
Probability, yes.
Why do you think you remain probably the prime suspect in the eyes of the Boulder police?
I asked Mark Beckner that. I came closer to him in the face than I am to you, Aaron, and I said, tell me what it is that makes you think I killed my beautiful, precious child. And he said, well, it's just a lot of little things.
But it was a strategy that was put in place to bring immense pressure on us to break us. It's frustrating, it's disappointing, it makes me angry.
You say it makes you angry, but you don't seem angry. Do you think that's also hurt you in the eyes of the public?
Well, we're not soap opera actors. I mean, I suppose if I was an actor, I could act really angry, but I'm not. That's who I am. It's what you see. And I'm angry. This is angry for me. What I do know is that we didn't kill our daughter. So let's look at the rest of the picture, guys.
What do you think about these fibers?
After John discovered the body and she was brought to the living room, when I laid eyes on her, I knelt down and hugged her. But I had my whole body on her body. My sweater fibers or whatever I had on that morning are going to transfer to her clothes.
When I left that interview, there was no doubt in my mind that he had nothing to do with the death of his daughter. They may not like what I say, but I'm going to say it. I don't think the Ramseys did it, and I think they ought to start looking for people that did.
How would you describe Lou Smith?
He's my hope in finding out who killed my daughter.
As a detective, I'm looking for clues.
That had to have been made by the killer during the murder.
You see hair right inside the windings of that cord. That's JonBenét's hair. She did have her own DNA under her fingernails. I'm pretty sure that's a scratch to get that off. I think she was struggling then. It's not a mother waking up in the middle of the night saying, oops, I think I hurt my child. Oops, I gotta bring her downstairs and fashion one of these things. Then I'm gonna put it around her neck and I'm gonna tighten it a couple times while she's struggling. Now, if you want to believe that, go ahead. I can't say this on the air, but that's bull.
Every plan is built on traces of the past, and the JonBenét Ramsey case is no different, especially when it comes to Patsy Ramsey. There are simply too many coincidences for anyone to ignore, too many details that feel more like design than chance. Just 2 days before Christmas, on December 23, Patsy presented her 6-year-old daughter JonBenét with a delicate gold identification bracelet, engraved with the child's on the front and the date 12/25/96 on the back, the very day JonBenét was meant to receive it as a holiday gift, which coincidentally marked her last full day alive or the exact date of her death, depending on the timeline of the murder. This wasn't a typical engraving for such bracelets, which usually bore birth dates rather than gift receipt dates, raising questions about whether this personalization foreshadowed a darker intent, as if Patsy were subconsciously or deliberately marking a fateful endpoint. The bracelet remained on JonBenét's wrist when she was discovered, turning what seemed like a sentimental gesture into a chilling detail that echoed the premeditation of labeling a victim for posterity. As Christmas Eve approached, Patsy's preparations for the holiday added another layer of unsettling prescience. She had hidden JonBenét's My Twin doll, a custom-made replica of the child, in a basement laundry room shelf for weeks, only retrieving it that night to place under the tree. Upon opening the box, Patsy described a momentary horror. The doll's golden hair and closed eyes evoked the image of JonBenét lying in a coffin, a vision so vivid it caught her breath. She even shared this disturbing thought with her husband John before the murder occurred, admitting it felt like a premonition of death. This anecdote, later recounted in the Ramseys' 2000 book, The Death of Innocence, aligns disturbingly with the reality that followed, where JonBenét's body was found in that same basement, her blonde hair framing a face that would soon be prepared for burial. The doll's coffin-like appearance in its shipping carton mirrored the child's eventual fate, suggesting that Patsy's mind might have been harboring morbid associations long before the crime, perhaps planting seeds for a scenario that blended holiday cheer with tragedy. The holiday decorations themselves carried symbolic weight that Patsy later reflected upon as an unconscious weaving of death into the festivities. choosing deep purple ribbons for the Christmas tree and wreaths, a color traditionally associated with Advent and Lent in Christian liturgy, signifying both anticipation and mourning. Patsy inadvertently infused the season with themes of sacrifice and loss. In her book, she pondered how this choice beckoned to the future, linking the cradle of nativity to the cross of crucifixion, an analogy that gained haunting resonance after the causes of death. This wasn't a post hoc rationalization alone. The purple motifs were selected well in advance, during the setup of the home's holiday displays in early December, hinting at a subconscious pattern where everyday decisions foreshadowed violence, as if Patsy's aesthetic choices were subtly scripting a narrative of impending doom rooted in her religious upbringing. Rewinding to early December 1996, Patsy's shopping habits introduced elements that were directly tied to the crime's physical evidence. On December 2 and December 9, purchases appeared on her American Express card at McGuckin Hardware in Boulder, including items priced at $1.99, the exact cost of the black duct tape later found sealing JonBenét's mouth. When John Ramsey, identifying himself over the phone in 1997, inquired about these receipts, he initially provided an incorrect account number before confirming the transactions were under Patsy's card, suggesting an urgent need to trace or obscure potential links. The duct tape, which the Ramseys denied owning, bore traces of red, blue, pink, purple, and brown fibers, along with beaver fur, matching reports of Patsy's boots adorned with beaver trim. This transfer of uncommon animal fur to the tape implied intimate contact, unlikely from an intruder unless Patsy had handled it herself, pointing to a procurement process that began weeks prior and integrated personal belongings into what could be seen as a staged scene, drawing from her daily life to construct a facade of external invasion. A month earlier, in November 1996, while shopping at a home improvement store in Athens, Georgia, where the Ramseys had family ties, Patsy reportedly asked a clerk for help locating duct tape, an inquiry that stood out given the family's later denial of possessing the specific black variety used in the crime. This occurred during a trip that coincided with Patsy's ongoing recovery from ovarian cancer, diagnosed in 1993, a period of vulnerability that might have amplified existential reflections on life and loss. Her statements around this time, such as musing that JonBenét would never have to know the loss of a child or endure cancer's pain, carried a prophetic undertone, as if Patsy were envisioning a shortened life for her daughter to spare her future hardships. These words, uttered before the murder, align with the crime's outcome, where JonBenét was indeed shielded from adult sufferings through her untimely death, suggesting that Patsy's health struggles and philosophical musings could have fermented into a distorted plan to protect her child eternally. Everything even went more crazy when we step back further to 1995. Patsy's annual Christmas newsletter included a playful quote from the film, The Shining. "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," a line famously typed repeatedly by the movie's deranged protagonist. This echoed the ransom note's cinematic flair, which investigators noted borrowed phrases from films like Ransom and Speed, including demands for a proper burial and warnings not to grow a brain. The note's author seemed versed in movie dialogue, much like Patsy's casual incorporation of pop culture into family correspondence, implying a stylistic continuity that reached back at least a year. Even deeper in Patsy's past, her 1977 participation in the Miss West Virginia revealed foundational elements that resurfaced in the crime scene. At age 20, Patsy's talent portion featured a dramatic monologue from The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, a story involving a scene of children enjoying pineapple cubes with cream, scooped by spoon amid a tea setting, mirroring the undigested pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach and the bowl with a spoon and tea glass on the Ramsey dining table the morning after the murder. This literary choice from her youth, centered on innocence and hidden dangers in a school environment, paralleled the pageantry world Patsy later immersed JonBenét in, where the child won titles like Little Miss Colorado, echoing Patsy's own crowns. The pineapple detail, seemingly innocuous in 1977, resurfaced as forensic evidence in 1996, suggesting that Patsy's early performative life provided subconscious blueprints for the crime's domestic staging, as if long-buried memories were exhumed to craft a tableau of interrupted childhood bliss. Patsy's journalism degree from West Virginia University in 1978, with its emphasis on crafting narratives, might have honed skills evident in the ransom note's lengthy, scripted prose, unusual for re-kidnappers, but fitting for someone trained in persuasive writing. Her sorority days and beauty queen persona fostered a flair for drama and presentation, qualities that critics argue manifested in the crime scene's elaborate setup, from the garret fashion from a paintbrush in Patsy's arties to the blanket partially covering JonBenét, evoking a staged piet. These threads from the 1970s and 1980s, including her marriage to John in 1980 and the birth of Burke in 1987, built a life narrative where control over image and story became paramount, potentially evolving into a mechanism for orchestrating a tragic resolution when faced with personal crisis like her cancer battle. But the question remains, are these coincidences enough to draw a final conclusion? To answer that, we have to turn to the biggest contradiction of all, the ransom note, and the demands of the man who supposedly wrote it, John Ramsey. John Ramsey recounted the discovery of the ransom note on the morning of December 26, 1996, during his interview podcast. He stated that wife Patsy Ramsey found the note on the spiral staircase in their home while preparing for a planned trip to Michigan, but
I know in some of the interviews they bring up for Patsy that it goes back to the note, and I think one of the reasons they keep those who believe she wrote it perpetuate the idea that she wrote it is because it seems like it's not a clear answer or direction of how much of the note she saw, because initially she's it's like your daughter, we have your daughter, and then she goes up and looks, but then she talks about later looking out the window and seeing that it's a marked car and being concerned. And people will say, oh, how did you know that, that was later on the note? People will say, oh, when she calls 911, how does she know how it's signed if she only saw the first page?
he mentioned that in her call, Patsy referenced details from later parts of the note, such as the signature, S.B.T.C, and concerns about a marked police car, which raised questions about how much of the note she actually saw. This discrepancy is peculiar, as John seemed unconcerned about the inconsistency, stating that the morning was chaotic and he couldn't recall exactly what Patsy read. His lack of curiosity about this detail stands out, as one might expect a parent to scrutinize such a critical piece of evidence. Additionally, John did not mention any immediate efforts to verify the note's authenticity or check for physical evidence like fingerprints on it, which seems odd given the gravity of the situation. Regarding the arrangement of the ransom money, John explained that he did not have $11,000 in cash readily available, so he took steps to gather the funds as demanded in the note.
I don't have $118,000 laying around, but a friend of mine, who was my banker, got my ATM limit on my Visa card jacked up. And I gave that card to a friend, I don't know who it was, somebody that was there, and said, go get the money. And they came back and didn't get the money, and I was like, why didn't you get the money? Like, well, no, I don't need to do that yet.
He contacted a friend who was a banker to increase the ATM withdrawal limit on his Visa card to cover the amount. John then entrusted this card to another friend present at the house, instructing them to withdraw the money and prepare it in an attaché case, as specified in the ransom note. However, this friend returned without the cash, stating it wasn't necessary yet, possibly because they were waiting for the kidnapper's promised call between 8 and 10 a.m. John expressed frustration at this, asking, "Why didn't you get the money?" but did not elaborate on why the effort was abandoned. This raises questions about the urgency of the situation, as John's account suggests a surprising lack of follow-through for a parent desperate to secure their child's release. Furthermore, his vagueness about the friend's identity and the absence of any mention of coordinating with police to trace the money or prepare for a potential drop-off is unusual. One might expect a more proactive approach, such as ensuring the money was ready or discussing logistics with law enforcement, yet John's narrative lacks these details. The specific amount of $11,000 demanded in the ransom note also piqued interest during the interview. John speculated that the figure matched his annual bonus from Lockheed, which was paid in January 1997, shortly after the incident. He also suggested that the kidnapper might have seen his pay stubs. He also suggested that his pay stubs from Lockheed, where he served as president of a subsidiary, were likely lying around the house, as the family did not take precautions to secure such documents.
What do you think it means?
Well, the only number that correlates that I know of is my bonus that year from Lockheed was $118,000, and it was paid in January. Mm-hmm. Now we're in December. It was on my pay stub every.
Did you have those somewhere in the house?
Oh yeah, I'm sure laying around somewhere.
Did they ever find them?
I don't know.
Mm.
These pay stubs would have shown his annual bonus of $118,000, paid in January 1997, shortly after the incident in December 1996. John speculated that someone familiar with the household could have seen these documents, including employees of his company, friends, neighbors, or even a stranger who entered the home, such as a cleaning lady who later reported seeing an unfamiliar man in their garage. However, John's account is notably vague. He admitted he was unsure if the police ever found or tested the pay stubs for fingerprints or other evidence. This lack of curiosity is peculiar, as one would expect a parent in such a situation to demand thorough investigation into how such specific financial details were accessed. His casual mention of the pay stubs being accessible, without expressing concern about household security or pressing for forensic analysis, raises questions about his engagement with this critical lead. When discussing why the ransom note demanded exactly $118,000, John Ramford that the amount matched his Lockheed bonus from that year, suggesting it was a deliberate choice by the perpetrator.
I think it was a mix. I mean, why not $1 million? Why not 500? You know, why not a big number?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big number, but doable. And why 118? Why not 100? Why not 200?
150.
It meant something to somebody.
He noted that the figure was significant because it was a feasible sum he could arrange, unlike a larger, round number like $1 million or $500,000. John theorized that the kidnapper chose this amount to send a personal message, possibly driven by anger or jealousy toward him, as it was directly tied to his financial status. He questioned why the demand wasn't for a different amount like $100,000 or $200,000, emphasizing that $118,000 meant something to the killer. Yet, his explanation is strikingly detached. He did not express urgency in exploring how the perpetrator knew this precise figure or whether the police investigated potential suspects with access to his financial records. This indifference is odd, as one might anticipate a father desperate for answers to push for scrutiny of such a specific clue. John's failure to recall whether the pay stubs were recovered or tested further underscores a surprising lack of follow-through. Overall, John Ramsey's account of the ransom note and kidnapping scenario is riddled with inconsistencies that strongly suggest the kidnapping was a fabrication. His minimal effort to secure the ransom money, with a friend abandoning the task without clear reason, and the absence of a kidnapper's call or JonBenét's removal from the home contradict a genuine kidnapping. John's evasive language, lack of remorse for disturbing the crime scene, and quick departure to Atlanta suggest a cover-up, possibly to protect a family member, aligning with the theory that the ransom note was crafted to conceal an accidental death within the household. If the kidnapping was John's lie, then on the other side, the ransom note was most likely Patsy's creation, which was crafted to serve that plan. To be precise, what John Ramsey told about Patsy and the ransom note, Patsy Ramsey claims she found the 3-page ransom note on the spiral staircase of the Ramsey home on the morning of December 26, 1996, while preparing for a family trip. However, her account of the sequence of events is inconsistent. Initially, she told police she first checked JonBenét's room, found her missing, and then discovered the note while descending the back spiral stairs to the kitchen. In a later statement, she reversed this order, saying she stumbled upon the note while going to make coffee at around 5:30 a.m. and only then ran upstairs to check JonBenét's room. This shifting narrative is peculiar, as one would expect a parent in such a distressing situation to have a clear recollection of the sequence of discovering their child's absence and a ransom note. The discrepancy suggests either genuine confusion under stress or an attempt to align her story with a constructed narrative, which undermines the credibility of her account. Another striking peculiarity arises from Patsy's 911 call, where she referenced details from later pages of the note despite claiming she only read the opening line, "We have your daughter." Specifically, she mentioned the signature S.B.T.C. and expressed concern about a marked police car, details found on subsequent pages of the note. This raises questions about how she knew these specifics if she only glanced at the first page in a dimly lit stairwell, as she and John describe. Patsy's ability to cite details she shouldn't have known suggests she may have been familiar with the note's full content before the call, pointing to possible foreknowledge or involvement in its creation. Patsy's handling of the note itself is also peculiar. She claims she didn't pick it up, only leaned over to read it, and John similarly stated he didn't handle it extensively, yet the note ended up on the floor where Officer French retrieved it. This raises questions about how the note was moved from the staircase to the floor without either Ramsey clearly admitting to touching it. In an April 1997 police interview, Patsy wavered on whether she picked it up, saying, "I don't remember if I picked it up or just leaned over and read it," before asserting she didn't think she picked it up because she immediately ran upstairs. This reluctance to admit handling the note is odd, as one would expect a parent to grab such a critical clue to examine it closely or hand it to their spouse or police. The fact that only Patsy's fingerprints were found on the note, despite her claim of minimal contact, further complicates her account, suggesting either contamination or an effort to distance herself from incriminating evidence. Patsy's behavior during and after the 911 call further highlights peculiarities. She called family and friends immediately after contacting police, despite the note's explicit warning against contacting anyone, which seems reckless for a parent fearing for their child's safety. This action appears to deliberately contaminate the crime scene, as it introduced additional people into the home before police could secure it. Additionally, her body language during a 2000 Larry King interview, when asked about finding the note, included a long, blocking blink which some analysts interpret as a sign of discomfort or deception. Her vague responses, such as, "I don't know," when asked about the note's details, and her failure to mention critical elements like the 10 call deadline, suggest an attempt to downplay the note's significance. This is particularly strange given the note's central role in the alleged kidnapping, as one would expect a parent to obsessively analyze its contents for clues. A report emphasizes that the Ramseys, including Patsy, treated the note with low priority, which is inconsistent with a genuine kidnapping scenario. Patsy's claim that she barely read the note, combined with her son Burke's disinterest in examining it during a Dr. Phil interview 20 years later, suggests a family-wide avoidance of engaging with the note's details. The speaker argues this reflects a deliberate strategy to divert attention from the note, which, if scrutinized publicly early on, might have led someone like Linda to recognize Patsy's handwriting. The note's delayed release to the public, only after autopsy evidence, further supports this, as it allowed the Ramseys to control the narrative and avoid immediate suspicion. Patsy's inconsistent accounts and minimal interaction with the note, despite its household origins, align with a pattern of psychological staging, where the note served to mislead investigators into focusing on a kidnapping rather than a homicide within the home. Beside that, the ransom note in the JonBenét Ramsey case exhibits several peculiar characteristics in its length, style, handwriting, and alignment with Patsy Ramsey, compounded by the use of her personal materials, which collectively suggest it was crafted by someone intimately familiar with the Ramsey household, potentially Patsy herself. These aspects, drawn from the provided texts, raise significant doubts about the note's authenticity as a genuine kidnapping demand and point to possible staging to mislead investigators. The note's extraordinary length, 3 pages, is highly unusual for a ransom demand, which is typically concise to ensure clarity and urgency. Unlike standard kidnapping notes that focus on demands and instructions, this note rambles with excessive detail, including dramatic threats like, "You will be denied her remains for proper burial," and references to a small foreign faction. Among 25,000 annual homicides in the US, very few involve such a verbose, bogus ransom note, suggesting its purpose was narrative staging rather than a practical demand. The length implies the author had ample time and comfort in the Ramsey home, inconsistent with an intruder writing under pressure. This verbosity aligns with Patsy's journalistic background, as her education and writing experience could enable her to craft such an elaborate document. The speaker suggests this reflects a literate author attempting to dumb down their style, a tactic Patsy, with her advanced literacy, could employ to disguise her involvement. The style and tone of the note are equally peculiar, blending formal, deferential language with amateurish elements. Phrases like, "Mr. Ramsey, we respect your business," and "Who's that good Southern common sense of yours?" are oddly respectful, while misspellings such as "bussiness" and "possession" and movie-inspired lines from Dirty Harry and Speed give it an adolescent, theatrical feel. Experts highlight the note's legalistic phrases, such as, "We have your daughter in our possession," instead of simply, "We have your daughter," and unnecessary advice like, "Bring an adequate-sized attache," and "Be rested," which seem disconnected from a kidnapper's typical focus on securing payment. This mix of sophistication and deliberate errors suggests an attempt to mislead by creating a false persona. The note's artistic and overly familiar tone aligns with Patsy's journalism training and her tendency to use expressive, detailed language. The use of Patsy's materials in the note's creation is perhaps the most damning evidence pointing to her involvement. The note was written on paper from Patsy's notepad, and with a Sharpie pen similar to one she owned, both found in the Ramsey home. This strongly suggests the author had intimate access to the household, as an intruder would likely bring their own materials to avoid leaving traceable evidence. The note's household origins, combined with the use of Patsy's paintbrush in the device used in the death, indicate the crime was staged by someone within the home. In a 1997 police interview, she wavered on whether she picked it up, saying she might have only leaned over to read it, yet the note was found on the floor by Officer French, not the stairs. This discrepancy, along with the lack of other fingerprints, suggests either deliberate contamination or an effort to distance herself from incriminating evidence. Linda Hoffman Pugh, the Ramsey family's housekeeper for 14 months, provided testimony that contains peculiar aspects and compelling evidence suggesting Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note in the JonBenét Ramsey case. Linda's testimony about the Ramsey household, given under oath for 8 hours to the grand jury, includes peculiar details about the family's dynamics that provide a backdrop for suspecting Patsy's involvement. The most compelling evidence from Linda's testimony centers on her assertion that the ransom note's handwriting looked very much like Patsy's. Having received dozens of handwritten notes from Patsy over 14 months, often left on the spiral staircase where the ransom note was found, Linda claimed she was quite familiar with Patsy's handwriting and could recognize it with little difficulty. She pointed to specific features, such as Patsy's distinctive A's, use of accents on words like JonBenét and attache, and initialing patterns like S.B.T.C. These observations are significant, as they suggest the note's author was someone intimately familiar with the household's communication habits, consistent with Patsy's routine of leaving notes for Linda. The peculiarity here is the striking coincidence that the ransom note was placed in the exact location where Patsy typically left her notes, a detail Linda highlighted in her testimony. This alignment suggests the note was crafted by someone who knew this was a natural place for Patsy to find it, reinforcing suspicions of staging. Linda's credibility is bolstered by her extended testimony under oath, which the grand jury found compelling enough to vote for an indictment against the Ramseys, though the district attorney declined to sign it. Linda's testimony also identifies specific phrases in the note that mirror Patsy's speech patterns, further implicating her. She noted the use of percentages such as 99% chance and 100% chance of JonBenét's fate, which echoed Patsy's way of speaking, particularly in the context of her stage 4 ovarian cancer experience. Linda suggested these phrases reflected Patsy's mindset, shaped by her health struggles and interactions with her church community. Additionally, the note's reference to good Southern common sense, directed at John, aligned with Patsy's habit of teasing him about Southern traits, despite his Michigan origins. This personal touch is peculiar, as it implies the note's author had intimate knowledge of the Ramseys' interpersonal dynamics, unlikely for an outsider. Another peculiar aspect of Linda's testimony is her observation about the note's materials, which directly ties to Patsy. The note was written on paper from Patsy's notepad, and with a Sharpie pen similar to one she owned, both found in the Ramsey home. Linda's familiarity with the household, including the spiral staircase as a communication hub, strengthens the case that the note's creation was an inside job. The use of Patsy's materials is particularly suspicious, as an intruder would likely bring their own supplies to avoid leaving traceable evidence. It is noted that the note's household origins, combined with the use of Patsy's paintbrush in the garret, suggest the crime was staged by someone with unrestricted access to the home. Linda's testimony does not explicitly address the materials, but her recognition of the note's placement on the staircase aligns with this evidence, reinforcing the idea that Patsy, as the primary user of the notepad, was uniquely positioned to craft the note. The presence of only Patsy's fingerprints on the note, despite her claim of minimal handling, adds to the suspicion, as Linda's observations about Patsy's habits provide a plausible explanation for this forensic link. The evidence Linda provides, handwriting similarities, specific phrases, and the note's placement, strongly suggests Patsy's involvement, but the peculiarity lies in the lack of forensic confirmation. Despite Linda's confidence, handwriting analysis remains controversial, as noted by John Ramsey's dismissal of it as junk science. The absence of definitive forensic links, such as conclusive handwriting matches or additional fingerprints, weakens her claims, though her testimony swayed the grand jury. The true crime rocket science speaker highlights that the note's delayed public release prevented early scrutiny by others, like Linda, who might have recognized Patsy's handwriting sooner, suggesting a strategic move by the Ramseys to control the narrative. However, it seems that Patsy is not the only one involved in the ransom note. The note contains several linguistic errors and peculiar word choices that not only highlight its amateurish facade, but also suggest a connection to John Ramsey, either through his direct involvement or guidance in its creation. One notable error is the misspelling of business as business with one Morse letter in the phrase, "We respect your business," which opens the note with a formal address to Mr. Ramsey. This misspelling stands out as an attempt to make the note appear less sophisticated, yet the deferential tone toward John, a successful businessman, contradicts this. The error is peculiar because it contrasts with the note's otherwise complex structure, suggesting the writer, possibly Patsy under John's influence, deliberately introduced mistakes to obscure their literacy. The focus on John's business persona implies the author knew his professional status intimately, pointing to someone close to him, such as a family member, rather than an outside kidnapper unfamiliar with proper spelling. Another misspelling, possession written as possession with lack of a letter S in the phrase, "We have your daughter in our possession," further underscores the note's inconsistent tone. A report notes this as part of the note's psychological staging, suggesting the writer was crafting a narrative to mislead investigators. The error, combined with the notes addressed to John, hints that he may have contributed to its content, perhaps guiding Patsy to include such terms to create a convincing, but flawed kidnapping scenario. Leveraging his knowledge of business jargon to shape the note's tone. The phrase small foreign faction is another linguistic oddity that raises questions about the note's authenticity and its connection to John. Claiming the kidnapping was orchestrated by a small foreign faction, the note attempts to portray a sophisticated criminal group targeting John, yet the use of small undermines any sense of threat. A genuine kidnapper would avoid diminishing their group's perceived power. This peculiar choice suggests the writer lacked understanding of how a criminal faction would present itself, instead crafting a narrative that aligns with John's prominence as a businessman, possibly to deflect suspicion toward an external enemy. The focus on John as the target, combined with this unrealistic phrase, implies someone with insider knowledge of his status, potentially John himself, may have influenced the note's content to create a false motive, guiding Patsy to include such a term to bolster the kidnapping ruse. The insulting phrase "don't grow a brain," directed at John, is particularly striking for its personal and derogatory tone. Unlike typical ransom notes that focus solely on demands, this phrase mocks John's intelligence, warning him not to outsmart the supposed kidnappers. It suggests this reflects a personal grudge, aligning with John's own speculation that the perpetrator might have been a disaffected employee or someone envious of his success. However, the intimate, almost teasing nature of the insult, as noted by Linda Hoffman Pugh's testimony about Patsy's playful jabs at John, suggests a familial dynamic. This raises the possibility that John, aware of such personal references, either contributed to the note's language or reviewed it, ensuring it included elements that pointed away from the family while reflecting insider knowledge of his persona. These linguistic peculiarities, misspellings like business and possession, the odd small foreign faction claim, the personal insult "don't grow a brain," and the use of economic terms, collectively suggest the note was crafted to mislead while reflecting intimate knowledge of John's professional and personal life. The errors appear deliberate, designed to create an amateurish facade, yet the sophisticated structure and specific references to John's world point to someone close to him. While Linda's testimony strongly implicates Patsy as the writer, the focus on John's business persona and financial details suggests he may have been involved, either by reading and approving the note or guiding Patsy in its creation. His lack of curiosity about the note's origins, as noted in prior user conversations, and his failure to push for forensic analysis of the pay stubs further support the possibility that John was complicit in shaping the note to divert suspicion from the family, reinforcing the theory of a staged kidnapping. Overall, the intricate web of deception surrounding the Ramsey case reveals a calculated effort to obscure the truth, with the ransom note serving as a central piece of misdirection. The note, crafted with deliberate intent, was not a genuine demand for money but a tool to divert the investigation's focus. Its existence suggests a carefully orchestrated plan, one that points to John Ramsey as the likely architect. His role as the family patriarch, and a figure accustomed to control, aligns with the strategic nature of the note's creation. The language and structure of the note, while peculiar, were designed to create an external threat, shifting suspicion away from the family. Patsy Ramsey, with her flair for dramatics and attention to detail, likely played a supporting role in its execution, ensuring the note's theatrical tone aligned with the broader narrative the family sought to establish. This collaboration between John and Patsy highlights a dynamic where each leveraged their strengths to construct a facade of innocence. From the letter, we can recognize the roles of the other physical evidence at the scene further, which complicates the investigation, as it appears deliberately staged to confuse authorities. The blanket wrapped around JonBenét, for instance, carries a personal touch that subtly implicates Patsy. Its careful placement suggests an emotional connection, as if someone close to the victim sought to convey care or remorse, even if feigned. This act of wrapping the body could be interpreted as Patsy's contribution to the scene, aligning with her role in maintaining the family's image. The use of a device requiring both knowledge and intent further points to an insider with access to household items and an understanding of how to manipulate them to devastating effect. While the device itself does not directly name a culprit, its presence adds to the layers of complexity, forcing investigators to grapple with a multitude of possibilities rather than a singular, clear suspect. Other items at the scene, such as the flashlight, introduce additional ambiguity. The flashlight, believed to have caused head injury, stands out as a household object that could implicate multiple family members. Its presence suggests an improvised weapon, one that was readily available and could be used without arousing suspicion prior to the act. The flashlight's connection to John, as a practical tool he might have kept, subtly reinforces his potential involvement. However, its generic nature allows for plausible deniability, as it could belong to anyone in the household. This duality, evidence that points to specific individuals while remaining inconclusive, underscores the family's efforts to muddy the waters. By ensuring that no single piece of evidence definitively pins the crime on one person, the Ramseys created a scenario where suspicion could be deflected outward. The toy train track marks found on JonBenét's body add another layer of calculated misdirection, subtly pointing toward Burke Ramsey. These marks, likely made by a piece of his train set, suggest an attempt to implicate him without directly accusing him. Burke's known interest in knives, particularly his Swiss Army knife from his time as a Boy Scout, further amplifies this misdirection. The knife, a distinctive item associated with him, was strategically placed in the narrative through its presence at the scene. Its inclusion seems less about proving Burke's guilt and more about creating a plausible alternative suspect within the family, one who could be dismissed due to his age and perceived innocence. This tactic allowed the Ramseys to exploit the complexity of the case, knowing that investigators would hesitate to pursue a child as the primary suspect. The suitcase found in the basement, containing a blanket and notebook belonging to John Andrew Ramsey, serves a similar purpose. Its placement in the crime scene introduces yet another potential suspect, John's son from a previous marriage, while simultaneously diluting the focus on the immediate family. The suitcase, with its odd assortment of items, suggests an attempt to craft a narrative of an outsider or a disgruntled family member. By including John Andrew's belongings, the Ramseys could imply that someone with a personal connection to the family, but not necessarily present at the time, might have been involved. This tactic not only broadens the pool of suspects, but also exploits the investigators' need to explore every lead, no matter how tenuous, further delaying any conclusive findings. The presence of foreign DNA at the scene adds yet another dimension to the Ramsey family's efforts to obscure the truth. John's decision to invite numerous people to the house shortly after the discovery of JonBenét's body ensured that the crime scene was contaminated. Friends, neighbors, and others who arrived under the guise of offering support inadvertently left behind traces of their DNA, creating a chaotic pool of genetic material that investigators would later struggle to parse. This influx of outsiders allowed the Ramseys to fuel speculation about an intruder, a theory that gained traction due to the lack of clarity in the forensic evidence. The foreign DNA, while not necessarily indicative of an actual intruder, served as a convenient distraction, reinforcing the narrative that someone outside the family could have committed the crime. The sheer volume of conflicting evidence, each piece pointing in a different direction, demonstrates the sophistication of the Ramsey family's approach. By ensuring that every item, from the ransom note to the suitcase, carried multiple interpretations, they created a case that resisted resolution. The blanket, the flashlight, the train track marks, and the knife all serve as red herrings, each carefully chosen to suggest a different culprit while protecting the family as a whole. This strategy relied on the investigators' need to follow every lead, no matter how contradictory, effectively bogging down the process in a mire of possibilities. The Ramseys' ability to exploit the complexity of the case highlights their understanding of how investigations work and their willingness to manipulate that process to their advantage. The role of John Ramsey in orchestrating this deception cannot be understated. His position as the head of the household and his experience stakes environments likely informed his ability to devise a plan that accounted for multiple contingencies. Patsy's involvement, while perhaps secondary, was no less critical. Her attention to detail and emotional investment in the family's public image made her an ideal partner in crafting the narrative. Together, they created a scenario where every piece of evidence could be interpreted in multiple ways, ensuring that no single theory could dominate. The inclusion of Burke and John Andrew as potential suspects, however indirectly, further muddied the waters, exploiting the investigators' reluctance to focus solely on the parents. The motive behind the concealment in the JonBenét Ramsey case may centers on protecting family members, with a particular focus on shielding Burke Ramsey, the 9-year-old son of John and Patsy Ramsey, from suspicion and its devastating consequences. The family's efforts to obscure the truth suggest a desperate need to preserve their public image and maintain familial unity, especially in light of Burke's documented behavioral issues and a prior incident where he injured his sister. Burke's history of behavioral challenges provides a compelling reason for the family to prioritize his protection. At the time of the incident, he was known to have a solitary and sometimes volatile disposition, with a notable incident where he struck JonBenét with a golf club, causing a facial injury. This prior act, whether intentional or not, suggests a propensity for impulsive behavior that could have escalated in a moment of sibling conflict. The family's awareness of this history likely heightened their fear that an investigation would focus on Burke, especially given the statistical likelihood that a child's death in the home involves a family member. By creating a narrative of an external intruder, the Ramseys aimed to shift suspicion away from Burke, preventing authorities from probing his actions or psychological state. The decision to protect Burke also reflects the family's desire to avoid the stigma and potential legal ramifications of exposing internal dysfunction. As a minor, Burke was shielded from criminal liability, but any admission of his involvement, even in an accidental act, could have led to intervention by Child Protective Services or intense public scrutiny. The Ramseys, particularly John and Patsy, likely feared that such exposure would result in Burke's removal from their custody or psychological evaluations that could reveal underlying family issues. The housekeeper's testimony about the strained marriage between John and Patsy suggests that the couple relied on their children to maintain their bond, making the preservation of family unity a critical motive. By staging the crime scene with elements like the ransom note and household items, such as Patsy's notepad and paintbrush, the family created a complex web of evidence that pointed to an outsider, ensuring that Burke's role remained hidden. This protective strategy extended to avoiding any discussion of Burke's activities that night, with John and Patsy downplaying inconsistencies in his account, such as his admission years later that he was awake and playing with a toy, further indicating an intent to shield him from suspicion. The motive for concealment in the JonBenét Ramsey case was deeply rooted in protecting family members, with a particular emphasis on shielding John Ramsey from scrutiny that could expose his personal vulnerabilities and unravel the family's carefully crafted public image. The elaborate efforts to obscure the truth suggest a calculated strategy to safeguard John's reputation, social standing, and potential legal liabilities, particularly in light of speculations about past mistreatment within the family. As a successful businessman and the patriarch of the Ramsey household, John's position made him a focal point for public and investigative attention, amplifying the need to deflect suspicion from himself and maintain the family's unity. The concealment was not just about avoiding immediate consequences, but also about preserving John's legacy and ensuring the family's survival in the face of a scandal that could have destroyed their social and financial stability. John's role as the family's leader and primary decision-maker positioned him as the likely architect of the concealment strategy, driven by the need to protect himself from allegations that could tarnish his professional and personal life. His calm and rational demeanor, contrasted with Patsy's emotional volatility, suggests he took charge of managing the crisis to ensure it did not expose his vulnerabilities. The fear of an investigation delving into the family's private dynamics likely motivated John to orchestrate a narrative that pointed away from the household. Prior conversations indicate that John was aware of the statistical likelihood that a child's death in the home involves a family member, increasing the urgency to create a story that deflected blame. His quick decision to hire attorneys and limit cooperation with police reflects a strategic effort to control the narrative, protecting himself from questions about his role or past behavior. The family's relocation to Atlanta shortly after the incident further underscores this motive, as it allowed John to distance himself from Boulder's intense scrutiny and maintain his image as a grieving father rather than a suspect. The protection of John was intricately tied to preserving the family's public facade, which was critical to his identity as a successful executive. His position as president of a Lockheed subsidiary meant that any hint of scandal, particularly related to family dysfunction or mistreatment, could have jeopardized his career and social standing. The reference text suggests that John was acutely aware of the potential for an autopsy to reveal sensitive details, prompting him to manipulate the situation to avoid such exposure. By steering the investigation toward an external perpetrator, John ensured that attention remained focused outside the family, safeguarding his reputation from allegations that could have surfaced through a deeper probe into household dynamics. His media appearances, where he presented himself as a composed and grieving parent, were carefully calculated to reinforce this image, deflecting suspicion and maintaining public sympathy. This protective strategy, ensuring that any evidence or narrative pointed away from him, preserving his status as an untouchable figure in the community. The motive to shield John also involved manipulating Patsy to take on a more visible role in the concealment, thereby diverting suspicion from him. The reference text posits that John convinced Patsy that the entire family faced consequences if the truth emerged, leveraging her emotional state and trust in him to involve her in the cover-up. This dynamic suggests that John's primary concern was protecting himself, using Patsy as a buffer to absorb potential blame. Her emotional fragility, exacerbated by her cancer history and the pressures of maintaining the family's image, made her susceptible to John's influence. The housekeeper's testimony about the strained Ramsey marriage highlights that John held significant control in the relationship, likely using this power to guide Patsy's actions while keeping his own involvement minimal. This manipulation ensured that any investigative focus would fall on Patsy's inconsistencies or emotional reactions, rather than John's calculated decisions, further shielding him from scrutiny. Burke's protection was intertwined with John's, as exposing the 9-year-old's involvement would have inevitably drawn attention to John's parenting and potential oversights in the household. Burke's history of behavioral issues, including a prior incident where he injured JonBenét with a golf club, posed a risk of exposing family dysfunction that could reflect poorly on John. The referenced text suggests that an initial act by Burke, possibly accidental, triggered the need for concealment, but John's motive was less about shielding Burke and more about preventing an investigation that could uncover his own vulnerabilities. As a father, John likely recognized that any scrutiny of Burke would lead to questions about his and Patsy's supervision, potentially revealing patterns of neglect or mistreatment. By framing the incident as an external crime, John ensured that Burke's actions remained hidden, not out of paternal devotion but to avoid the broader implications for his own reputation. The family's insistence that Burke was asleep and uninvolved, despite later contradictions, reflects this effort to keep the focus off the household and, by extension, off John. The emotional and psychological stakes of protecting John were significant, as the family's social and financial stability depended on his untarnished image. The referenced text highlights that John's calm and rational approach allowed him to manipulate the narrative, convincing Patsy that their collective survival hinged on concealing the truth. His decision to invite friends to the home immediately after the 9/11 call, creating chaos and potential DNA contamination, was a strategic move to muddy the investigation, ensuring that any evidence pointing to the family could be attributed to external sources. This tactic protected John by creating a web of confusion, making it difficult for investigators to pinpoint his role. His subsequent media strategy, including appearances on CNN and Larry King Live, reinforced his image as a victim, deflecting questions about his behavior or the family's dynamics. The referenced text theory that John used Patsy as a scapegoat suggests he deliberately allowed her to leave visible traces of involvement, ensuring that any suspicion would fall on her rather than him. The concealment also served to protect John from the broader implications of family dysfunction, particularly in light of speculations about past mistreatment. The referenced text suggests that John feared an autopsy could reveal sensitive details, prompting him to orchestrate a cover-up that shifted blame elsewhere. His control over the family's narrative, seen in his dismissive responses to inconsistencies in Patsy's and Burke's accounts, indicates a deliberate effort to avoid scrutiny of his own actions. The housekeeper's observation that the Ramseys' marriage was held together by their children underscores the importance of maintaining family unity, with John as the central figure whose reputation anchored their social standing. By ensuring that the investigation focused on an external threat, John protected himself from questions about his parenting or personal conduct, preserving the family's facade of stability. His quick relocation to Atlanta, framed as a need to bury JonBenét in a family plot, was a calculated move to escape Boulder's investigative pressure, further shielding him from potential allegations. The motive to protect John extended to controlling the family's interactions with authorities, ensuring that his involvement remained obscured. His early retention of lawyers and limited cooperation with police, as noted in prior conversations, reflect a strategic effort to manage the flow of information, preventing investigators from probing too deeply into his role. The referenced text's emphasis on John's manipulation of Patsy suggests he used her trust to execute tasks that would draw attention away from him, while he maintained a clean image. His calm demeanor during the crisis, contrasted with Patsy's panic, allowed him to guide the family's response without appearing directly implicated. The decision to involve friends in the immediate aftermath, creating a chaotic scene, further protected John by introducing multiple variables that complicated the investigation, making it difficult to isolate his actions. This strategic chaos ensured that any evidence pointing to the family could be dismissed as contaminated, preserving John's position as an unlikely suspect. The protection of John was also about maintaining the family's financial and social capital, which rested heavily on his reputation. As a wealthy executive, John's standing in the community was critical to the family's lifestyle, and any hint of scandal could have jeopardized their economic stability. The referenced text theory that John sought to avoid allegations of mistreatment underscores his motive to keep the investigation focused on an external narrative, preventing questions about his personal conduct. His ability to control the family's public image, through carefully managed media appearances and legal strategies, reflects a deep-seated need to protect his legacy. The concealment was not just about immediate survival, but about ensuring that John's reputation remained intact. allowing the family to rebuild their lives away from Boulder's scrutiny. The referenced text's suggestion that John manipulated Patsy to take on the brunt of the cover-up highlights his prioritization of self-preservation, using his influence to ensure that any blame fell elsewhere while he emerged as a grieving, but untouchable figure. One thing that is perhaps quite remarkable is that although the Ramseys' cover-up scheme was very sophisticated, it still seemed difficult to completely erase the police's suspicions towards them. The police investigation into the Ramsey family began almost immediately after the discovery of the crime, with officers quickly noting inconsistencies that cast suspicion on the family. From the outset, the behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey raised red flags. When police arrived at the Ramsey home, they observed John's composed demeanor, which seemed at odds with the chaotic situation of a reported kidnapping. His calm and controlled responses, coupled with his quick decision to involve friends and family at the scene, struck investigators as unusual for a parent in distress. Patsy, on the other hand, appeared visibly emotional, but her theatrics seemed rehearsed to some officers, as though she were performing grief rather than experiencing it naturally. These early impressions led police to question whether the Ramseys were fully forthcoming, prompting a closer look at their actions and statements. As the investigation progressed, the police focused on the Ramseys' interactions with law enforcement, which often seemed evasive. John and Patsy were reluctant to participate in formal interviews in the days following the incident, requesting delays and legal representation before engaging with detectives. This hesitation was interpreted by investigators as a potential sign of guilt, as it contrasted with the expected urgency of parents seeking justice for their child. The police noted that when the Ramseys did agree to interviews, their responses were carefully measured, often aligning too closely with one another, suggesting possible coordination. Detectives found this level of synchronization suspicious, as it hinted at a premeditated effort to maintain a consistent narrative. The Ramseys' reluctance to cooperate fully fueled the police's belief that the family was withholding critical information. The police also scrutinized the Ramsey household dynamics, particularly the roles of John and Patsy as the primary caregivers. Investigators observed that John took a leadership role in interactions with authorities, often speaking on behalf of the family and directing the flow of information. This dynamic led some detectives to hypothesize that John was orchestrating the family's response to the investigation, possibly to shield himself or others from scrutiny. Patsy's behavior, while emotional, included moments of deflection, such as focusing on minor details or redirecting questions to broader concerns about the case. The police interpreted these actions as attempts to steer attention away from the family, reinforcing their suspicion that the Ramseys were not entirely transparent. This pattern of control and deflection became a focal point for investigators, who began to see the family as potential architects of a cover-up. Burke Ramsey, the couple's young son, also drew the police's attention, though his age complicated their approach. Detectives noted that Burke was unusually reserved when questioned about the events, displaying a level of detachment that seemed inconsistent with the gravity of the situation. While the police were cautious about directly implicating a child, they found it odd that Burke's account of the morning's events lacked the emotional weight one might expect from a sibling. Investigators conducted interviews with Burke under controlled conditions, but his responses were vague, and he appeared coached in some instances, further deepening police suspicion. The decision to limit Burke's exposure to intense questioning reflected the police's awareness of his age, but it did not eliminate their interest in his potential knowledge of the family's actions. The police's suspicion of the Ramsey family was further heightened by their analysis of the family's financial and social status. John Ramsey's success as a businessman and the family's affluent lifestyle suggested they had the resources and connections to influence the investigation's trajectory. Detectives noted that the Ramseys quickly retained high-profile legal counsel, which, while not inherently incriminating, signaled to investigators that the family was preparing for a prolonged battle rather than fully cooperating. The involvement of private attorneys and public relations experts suggested to the police that the Ramseys were more concerned with managing their image than assisting in the investigation. This perception led investigators to dig deeper into the family's background, looking for motives that might explain their guarded behavior. Another key factor in the police's growing suspicion was the Ramsey family's interactions with friends and associates who arrived at the house shortly after the incident. Detectives hypothesized that this influx of visitors was not a spontaneous act of grief, but a deliberate move to create confusion. The presence of multiple individuals allowed the Ramseys to argue that any inconsistencies in the scene could be attributed to outsiders, a theory the police found increasingly implausible. This tactic, combined with the family's selective cooperation, led investigators to believe that the Ramseys were actively working to obscure the truth. The police also paid close attention to inconsistencies in the Ramseys' timelines and accounts of the morning's events. When questioned separately, John and Patsy provided details that occasionally conflicted, such as their recollections of when they last checked on their children or their activities before discovering the situation. These discrepancies, though subtle, were significant to investigators, who saw them as evidence of a fabricated story. The police conducted repeated interviews to probe these inconsistencies, hoping to catch the Ramseys in a contradiction that might unravel their narrative. However, the family's legal representation ensured that these interviews were tightly controlled, limiting the police's ability to press for clearer answers. This cat and mouse dynamic only deepened the investigators' belief that the Ramseys were hiding something critical. The investigation also explored the possibility of prior tensions within the Ramsey family, as detectives sought to understand the context of the household. Police interviewed neighbors, friends, and associates to gather insight into the family's dynamics, uncovering reports of stress and high expectations surrounding the children's public appearances. While these findings did not directly point to a motive, they suggested to investigators that the Ramsey household was not as idyllic as portrayed. The police began to consider whether internal pressures could have contributed to the events, further focusing their scrutiny on the family. This line of inquiry was met with resistance from the Ramseys, who maintained a polished public image, but it reinforced the investigators' sense that the family was concealing underlying issues. The police's interactions with John Andrew Ramsey, John's son from a previous marriage, also played a role in their suspicions. Although John Andrew was not present at the time of the incident, investigators found his absence from the immediate family dynamic noteworthy. They questioned whether his relationship with the family might hold clues to underlying tensions or motives. Detectives interviewed John Andrew to establish his whereabouts and connections to the household, but his cooperative demeanor contrasted with the guarded responses of John and Patsy. This contrast led some investigators to speculate that the immediate family was more deeply involved than others, as John Andrew's openness seemed less calculated. The police's interest in him, while secondary, reflected their broader effort to map out the family's relationships and identify potential cracks in their unified front. As the investigation unfolded, the police employed various strategies to test the Ramseys' credibility, including polygraph tests and psychological profiling. While the Ramseys eventually agreed to polygraphs, they did so under conditions that limited the test scope, such as selecting their own examiners. The police viewed this as another attempt to control the narrative, as independent polygraphs might have yielded more reliable results. Psychological profiles developed by investigators suggested that the family's behavior aligned with individuals who were concealing information, particularly in their selective memory and carefully worded responses. These findings, while not definitive, reinforced the police's belief that the Ramseys were not fully forthcoming and were actively managing the investigation's direction. The police's focus on the Ramsey family was not without challenges, as the case's high-profile nature and the family's resources complicated their efforts. Detectives faced pressure from both the public and the Ramseys' legal team, who pushed back against aggressive questioning. Despite these obstacles, the police continued to pursue leads that pointed to the family, driven by the cumulative weight of their suspicious behavior. The Ramseys' reluctance to engage fully, their strategic use of legal and public relations resources, and the inconsistencies in their accounts all contributed to the investigators' growing conviction that the family held the key to unraveling the case. Each interaction with the Ramseys, from initial interviews to later confrontations, only deepened the police's resolve to probe further. Even as the family's defenses grew more sophisticated, the JonBenét Ramsey case serves as a stark example of how a family homicide can unfold and how a family might orchestrate a cover-up to protect its core, raising profound questions about truth, morality, and justice. This case illustrates the lengths to which a family may go to shield its members from accountability, revealing the complexities of familial loyalty when faced with a devastating tragedy. The elaborate staging, manipulation of evidence, and controlled narrative suggest a calculated effort to preserve the Ramsey family's reputation and unity, particularly to safeguard John and Burke Ramsey from suspicion. This scenario underscores a broader lesson. In the face of a crisis, families may prioritize their collective survival over transparency, even if it means obscuring the truth and complicating justice. The case prompts us to question how far one might go to protect loved ones, and whether such actions are justifiable when they obstruct the pursuit of truth. The Ramsey case highlights the dynamics of a family homicide, where internal dysfunction or secrets can lead to a desperate cover-up. The family's actions, inviting friends to contaminate the scene, limiting cooperation with police, and crafting a narrative of an external threat, demonstrate a deliberate attempt to deflect scrutiny from their household. This teaches us that family homicides are often shrouded in deception, driven by the need to protect personal or collective interests, such as social standing or emotional stability. The Ramseys' swift relocation to Atlanta and their strategic media appearances further illustrate how families might manipulate public perception to maintain their image, raising ethical questions about whether such protection justifies undermining an investigation. The case challenges us to consider whether the instinct to shield family members, even at the cost of justice, reflects a universal human impulse, or a moral failing that prioritizes self-preservation over accountability. The suspicion surrounding John and Burke Ramsey, fueled by police focus and the housekeeper's testimony about family dynamics, underscores the lesson that family homicides often involve layers of concealment that obscure the truth. The police's persistent scrutiny of the Ramseys' inconsistencies and their reluctance to fully engage with investigators reveal how families can close ranks to protect their own, even when evidence points inward. This case invites viewers to question the morality of such actions. Is it right to shield a family member, like Burke, whose behavioral issues might suggest involvement, or John, whose calm control hints at orchestration? The lack of definitive resolution in the case amplifies these questions, leaving us to ponder whether the family's efforts were a desperate act of love or a calculated betrayal of justice. Ultimately, the JonBenét Ramsey case forces us to grapple with the tension between familial loyalty and the pursuit of truth. It serves as a cautionary tale about how families can construct elaborate facades to protect their core, yet these efforts often deepen the mystery and prevent closure. The case leaves viewers with a lingering doubt: were the Ramseys protecting a guilty party, or were they victims of circumstance driven to extreme measures? This ambiguity challenges us to reflect on the ethical boundaries of family loyalty and whether the truth should ever be sacrificed to preserve a family's legacy. As we consider the Ramsey case, we are left questioning not only who was responsible, but also whether the act of concealment itself reveals a deeper, more troubling truth about